The King of Podcasts Radio Network proudly presents the Broadcasters Podcast, where we dive deep into the media industry headlines and dissect the digital disruption that diverges the masses into the new media counterculture and away from the media establishment. Here is the King of Podcasts.
Welcome to the Broadcasters Podcast. This is episode number 241. I'm King of Podcasts. Thanks for listening and finding the show wherever you listen to your podcasts: Apple, Spotify, Amazon, Google, iHeartRadio, and many others. And we'll talk about some of those tonight here on the program. We're going to start off talking about podcasting tonight because podcasting has such an influence. And when you really think about podcasting, you see all the streaming out there: Twitch, TikTok in some cases, Instagram, live streaming, or the podcasting being done on video. And you notice it's all still podcasting at the end of the day because they're still using Joe Rogan's mic, the Shure SM7, or the SM7 USB like I use, or the RE20s, the Electro Voices, or, pickup, the Rodecaster Pro. Like, you're seeing all these different microphones. Great microphones, by the way. Like, honestly, that is the fun part of the podcasting realm, is all the microphones you can buy and how they sound. I mean, for me, I haven't had a whole lot of chance to dabble into it. Like, if I had to have a collection of microphones, that would be probably the thing I would probably invest in. But I don't need that. I'm actually really happy with what I have now. I started off with a Samsung, one of the Sam Ash brand CO1 USB mics, which was fine. Then I moved up to the Blue Snowball. Then upgraded to the Blue Yeti. And then I've been now with the Shure SM7, which I bought all on ad revenue that I earned from the program in 2020. During that whole year in 2020, I made a good amount of bank with my hosting on Spreaker, which was nice. And that allowed me to have more than enough money to buy this microphone, which I've been using ever since. And I've been milking it for a while now. It's not a cheap microphone. It's very good. I would recommend it to many people. You hear it out there. And it's interesting how many different videos, whether they're small clips or they're large pieces of content, and everybody learning what microphones to get and what their setup should be and how they're very cozy and cush, and how everybody has a certain particular podcasting setup that everybody has to have. Some have to have that. They definitely have to have the Howard Stern kind of look. And I will say this over and over. Howard Stern, for many points of his career, from the early 80s all the way up into the 2000s, he is responsible for the setup of podcasting we have today. Even though his content might have gotten stale and he's decided to go more political than ever before, which was not a normal thing for him, it just lost the interest, the original intent of the show. Yeah, sure, you're going to change with the times, but you've also alienated the audience that was there for you. That doesn't mean you couldn't, mature the audience, but when you apologize for the content you've done over 25 years plus, and you decide to write a book and apologize about it, and completely regret and give remorse for what you did, instead of accepting who you've been. It's something to be said about maybe that Howard Stern never wanted to be the next Andrew Tate. Because, God forbid anybody wants to go ahead and speak their mind and speak what they really mean. Listen, I used to go ahead and kind of thump on free speech in this program for a while. You know what? I don't do it anymore. The fight's just not there, and people are not listening. I listen to different content creators on YouTube or on TikTok or Instagram or whatever, and I just realized that, it is true. You really can't persuade anyone. You really can't change anyone's minds. People are set to a certain set of beliefs. And to think you're going to persuade and change somebody else's mind, even though if you bring facts or truth or whatever you might think you have, everybody's going to have some reason to believe it's otherwise. But that's another story. Let me get back to Howard Stern. His setup with the couch, the setup with the microphones and the boom mics going out to the people as he's doing interviews with whoever he has on the couch, and then his own setup with the whole thing back there, and then the other shows that are out there that have also taken a certain format and everybody's taking it. The Joe Rogan format, a very good example. Him in that studio with the side-by-side microphones, and everybody has their own accoutrements, different decorations around the studio. They're all doing the same thing like that. And if it's not that, everybody has their own microphone, their own setup where they can go ahead and broadcast whatever they're doing. Everybody has their own setup of how they want to do it. If you're sitting on a couch, you're sitting on, like chair, on a gamer chair, whatever you're doing. Everybody's found their own way. And it's amazing that for all the video content that the digital disruption has created, when you're watching YouTube and you say to yourself, everybody to make sure they have quality sound. Like, of course, the cameras are good. They have that good HD quality, 4K basically, or 8K video quality out there. But then you notice that nobody's using lavaliers. Nobody's bothering. They're not worried about the arms of the microphones and where they're being placed. Look, we can talk about all the shows that are out there. And I can talk about different political shows. I can talk about different entertainment shows that are out there, all doing their own thing with their own microphones. And it's amazing where everybody has their own setup. Now, don't judge the fact of the content. Let's try to take the content out of the conversation here. And let's just solely talk about the setups of all these different programs. Okay? Most of the Daily Wire content, they have nice setups with the microphones, nicely decorated sets. David Pakman's got a good setup. Joe Rogan's got a good setup. Impulsive, Logan and Jake Paul, they got a nice setup with their stuff over there. I look at the Fresh and Fit podcast. I've passed by that before, and I've seen a number of different shows and how they set themselves up and how they put themselves. I mean, I'm also a wrestling fan, so I watch the Wrestling Observer radio show and their setup. Everybody is not mic'd up with a lavalier, and they're not sitting on particularly any director's chairs or any kind of setup that's set like a regular television studio. They're just not doing it. Like, they're not trying to do the late night set. That's passe. They're taking the Howard Stern, Joe Rogan model of presenting podcasts. That's what they've been doing for a long time now, and it's good. Listen, you should feel comfortable with what you're doing the shows on. And the fact you're getting that little bit of that behind the scenes kind of feel, and you don't have to be behind some big cabinetry in a studio to do the show, not necessarily, that's okay too. And I've seen everybody try to do different things where they can have multiple people in the studios, multiple microphones, they get the setup, they got the padding, it sounds good, it's got a good setup, and it sounds good. I mean, it's like just people are paying attention to that, and they're just realizing, I want the quickest, easiest, most effective way. And everybody has accepted the nice big ribbon or condenser microphones that are out there in front of them, and they're talking right into it, and it just sounds good. And everybody that's on the shows are also realizing the same thing. The microphones are set up like that. Pat McAfee show. There you go. That's another example. I think of Rich Eisen, or I think of Dan Patrick. They all have their own shows. And Dan Le Batard, another great example. You look at all these different shows, and on ESPN especially, you look on television, all the radio shows where they're just broadcasting them out as television. They might add some, overlays, and they might throw some other things out. Steven Crowder's another example. All of them have their own way of doing some quirky kind of set, their decorations, however they're putting it together, and it's fine. And it looks good. So everybody has their own setup. For me, I keep looking, do I want to do a video setup? If I'm going to do it, I have to do it with the green screen. I need something better. And I might do some more video content. I've thought about it. Like, when I look at myself, I say, okay, I can set another HD microphone, it's another HD camera. I just need to add a USB splitter to my laptop, plug it in, add an extra camera, position it, and then have the green screen pointed out. And I could use like a virtual set. I'll tell you another one that does a really good example of what I'm talking about. When it comes to wrestling, there's a guy I follow and I watch constantly. His name is JD from NY206. He's done a really good job of using an animated set where originally he had himself inside of a smoky bar backdrop behind him. And before it was just, you could see it was the room he was recording from. And now he's created like what's called a beer garden. And you look at the decoration behind it, and he has a squared out section so you can see him on the microphone that he's on. And it's set up really nicely. And it's very decorative. A lot of bells and whistles going on in the background. It looks good. And people have normalized podcasting. And yes, the pandemic really helped out that, but everybody just got into the mix of it, and now it's normalized. And I'm actually kind of surprised on how many people are out there doing this same kind of content. I mean, every TikTok video I watch, look, let me put this out here too. I mean, I could have thought of this as a subject this week. I could have gone ahead with this, but I chose not to. Listen, I am the editor, producer, host, director, guest coordinator. I do everything on this program. I'm a one-man show doing this show, if you couldn't tell. And I work really hard to make this show sound as good as it does. And I work quite a bit every week looking for content to talk about, which I have plenty to talk about this week. And one of the things I briefly touched upon on my Depraved and Debaucherous show this week was Andrew Tate. Now, look. In the same thing I'm talking about, if you take away the fact that Andrew Tate has been a figure that has now been banned on all social media, canceled, basically, I look at every piece of content that just drops into my FYP. I mean, you can't get away from the content. But I will say that every time I look at every studio he's been in, it's a proper, podcast studio. You see him on the microphone. Hell, he's got his own studio with microphones, but he goes on shirtless and all, which is like, okay. But, I mean, it's a shtick, it's a gimmick, it's whatever it is. But, everybody can go ahead and choose whether they like the messages. They don't. I'm not here to go ahead and say one way or the other. But I could have gone on and talked about the cancellation of Andrew Tate. I'm just not going to. It's just not for me to go and talk about because it is such a divisive discussion. Because we know the type of people that have also been canceled in the same way and what kind of narrative comes from them. I mean, if you just bring up the name, it's like, now I hate a person, much like somebody that has been the president of the United States. I got it. I don't need to get into that kind of stuff. But I will just make the point and say, listen, that guy had what happened to him, whether you like him or not. I will say that it did warrant at least just a mention on the program that it is a pretty big internet personality that in a short amount of time did get really viral really quick. And a lot of people talked about him. And you look at the same thing with the people that are out there and the setting up of the podcast for themselves. And no matter what, if you're putting out content, no matter how engaging it is, it has to sound good. It has to look good. So when I look at the constant work with other content creators, much like Andrew Tate, not too long ago, we had Kevin Samuels with a very similar message about masculinity, about traditional masculinity, which is now considered toxic, but that's neither here nor there for me to talk about tonight. But even he had a good setup. And he was on Instagram. And he put his show together. And sure, I mean, just you look at the microphone, you look at his setup on the show, all the little accoutrements that he did, how he presented himself. He was dressed to the nines constantly. And many others do the same thing. My problem is I don't want to get dressed up. But I look at all this content and the way it's presented. This is regardless of what you think of the content itself. But you see a lot of people swaying away from the look of a television show. Like when you're doing a program, you realize people don't even want to worry about doing a show like that anymore. It's not even the look of what you want to do now. And it's quite interesting on how that happens. And all I can say is I just look at the different shows that are out there, the way they're presented, that the internet programming that's out there, if it's talk-related programming, streaming-related programming, whatever it is, you can just tell that everybody is just going the radio route, going the podcasting route, which further intensifies how important podcasting is. And there's a story that just came out from Edison Research that attests to this. New Edison data showing that there's a growing role of video for podcasters. Now, we know that's been out there. And one of the things that we always talked about, which was very important, was how when we're looking at the content that's out there, I mean, at the very beginning of podcasting, I always said to myself, video streaming had not gotten to that point yet. I mean, when I was doing this, starting off in 2005, August 2005 is when I started doing podcasting, which is why I have the King of Podcasts name. I've taken the claim of it, taken the URL, all the social media names for it, all of it. And I had the website, like I said, kingofpodcasts.com. I did a little redecoration. If you want to take a look at it, see what I do for a living and all my other content, please feel free to go and look at that right there. And I'll tell you like this. So the early days, first of all, we had to worry about the audio quality. And I remember when we were streaming live in 2005, it was just after, Mark Cuban had live audio. And when you hear certain shows, you're lucky if the stream, on audio stream is going live and it's not buffering at 32 kilobytes, 32 KB, right? Not gigabytes, kilobytes. Those days. And I remember we then got to a 64K stream, then 128. And, then that started being good enough for music. When you started hearing music stations out there rebroadcasting themselves, then we got the AAC as a format. Like, all that streaming is nice. But when we got into the podcasting realm and everything was on demand, getting that Netflix feel, which, podcasters out there will talk about how what Netflix is to TV is what podcasting is to radio, which it really is. But what we're noticing is at the time when we were thinking about why don't we do video? Well, listen, you watch people doing Zoom calls. People are a little more accepting than I thought because of the fact that sure, you might have somebody as a talking head, but they don't want to watch Zoom calls. But if you're doing a program and you have a good quality streamer like an OBS or a live stream or Riverside or whatever you're going to use, I mean, or Discord, whatever you want. Like, people are using certain platforms that can make a program broadcast quality and look good and in 8K. That's good. And people are actually engaging into the content because I'll tell you, when I look at Joe Rogan, yeah, you got a 3-camera shot, and you don't necessarily need camera people in there. You just switch to 3 cameras and you just robotically move them around with joysticks. I mean, people do that for like student council meetings or church services, right? Not a student council, like school board meetings, stuff like that. But people are willing now these days, the younger demographic watching podcasting, they're okay with watching just people talk. It's kind of where it is that like kind of the late night feel, but they don't need other things going on in the background for them to go ahead and stay engaged. Like, they're not going to be turned off if they're watching. It's kind of interesting like that. So the podcast movement conference is going on in Dallas. And I must say this too. Why is it every year podcast movement or Podfest or whatever? I did talk to Podfest. Don't get me wrong. I talked to them. I was offered the chance to do a Pecha Kucha presentation. 5 to 7 minutes. I know. It's like the cattle call of podcasters or podcasts, ingenues that are just joining into the space. I want to be part of a panel. I'm not asking to be in a keynote, but I'd rather be part of a panel. But the fact that yours truly, King of Podcasts, has never been offered an attendance to podcast movement. The fact that these shows go on, and I'm like, I'm right here. I should, and I deserve to be at a conference like that. At least an invitation. There's so much knowledge I can give and so much expertise I've learned doing over 15,000 episodes or 15,000 hours of programming in my time. Hosting, editing, producing, recording, coordinating. Like, I've worn every hat in podcasting, like I've done every hat in radio. And you're telling me that there is never a time that somebody decides that someone like yours truly should not be at this show. And I've said this before, but of course it falls on deaf ears. What? It's because I don't have that monster audience? I mean, I don't put the money out there to go ahead and market and promote the show with paid advertising like I could. I mean, I could do that, but I've enjoyed doing this for almost 10 years now, coming up in December, where I get to go and put this program together. Well, shows like this together. This show I started January of 2018. And it's amazing. I'm going to get to 5 years doing this program. Am I right? Am I saying that correctly? Am I about to go and get to the point where this program, I'm going to have gone all the way? Is that right? Even before, when I used to call it creative, not corporate, am I really always at the point? Yes, I am. January 2018, when I started this show, I will start the 5th year of this program in January. Time flies by. Completing year 4 of this program, and there's no chance, there's nothing that's making me stop this right now. And through a tough time the last couple of weeks, I've been making sure to continue to do this show, even though I might not have put out hour-long episodes every time. But this is one of those things where when I do a show like this, I'm saying to myself, man, podcast movement doesn't consider to give me a call. Like, my information's out there. And I've been running more consistently 2 radio networks, 2 podcast networks ever since. Okay, if it was not, why not radio back in the day, 2006? If it hasn't been webmasterradio.fm or WR.fm, which is the current network I run now, or cannabisradio.com. I mean, they might be niches that they might not listen to or watch. We're not going after that mainstream audience. I'm not with NPR. Okay, I'm not with Vox. I'm not with Earwolf. I'm not with iHeartRadio. I'm not with Odyssey. I'm not with Podcast One. And that's okay. But it's really, to me, I just surprised I never get that call. I don't know. But sometimes that's how it works. That someone like me that's been doing this for a long time and snubbed, I mean, I guess I'm the Susan Lucci of the podcasting space. I'll take that distinction. That's okay. Not my fault I make it look easy. I make it sound easy. I sit here on my accent chair, lazy boy, with one of these little bank-like kind of things in the background, recording in my bedroom, my studio, which is my bedroom. Laptop, and plugged in. Comfortable. Doing this show week after week after week. 715 shows I celebrated on the Rest Goes Real podcast, my long-standing independent series I've been doing since 2012, of which I will be celebrating 10 years doing that program coming up. And like I said, I'll be celebrating 4 years complete on the Broadcasters podcast come January. Been around doing this for a long time, and I've been doing podcasting since August 2005. I got a pretty good resume. But the folks at Podcast Movement, they couldn't possibly consider to go ahead and have yours truly get a ticket, ticket in the hotel, have me go and speak there, let me work, let me go ahead and, interview people on the show floor, talk to the exhibitors. I could have done a service for all of you, but I don't get the chance to. But I'll talk about one of the things that happened in this conference. They're talking about now recent moves where YouTube has accelerated interest. We'll talk about that in just a moment. But there was a presentation of podcasters on Wednesday, and Gabriel Soto, who's director of research at Edison Research, talked about the latest data showing a continued rise of podcasts listening via video. And in their data from the second quarter, they show that 6% of weekly podcast listeners have never listened to an audio-only podcast despite the medium's origins, even though 94% have an audio-only experience. But there are people that will take both. Now, they said that podcasting has established a spot on the list of advertising options open to marketers in part because its audio format has delivered attentive listeners that make high cost per measurement or CPMs palatable thanks to the high return on investment podcast ads delivered. And they say that advantage has continued to hold as some shows make the leap to video. Yeah, Video simulcast. It's not a new concept, but a lot of people want to go ahead and not necessarily run the whole stream on video, but they'll take clips to entice people towards the audio content or to the video streaming of whatever they're doing. 72% of those surveyed say they actively watched a podcast while listening. 72%. And the data seems to suggest that video consumption may be more of a matter of convenience and a desire to watch. 65% surveyed said they listened to a podcast via video that was either playing in the background or minimized. So what's going on with that is they're saying that YouTube is just a good place to go find podcasts. And it is. My content's up there. Everything I've been doing since 2018 is up on the site. YouTube.com/JBRASCO951. And by the way, I have tried to do video a couple times. I mean, it's not much to see here. You see my face. I might put the stories up on the screen, and I'm up there on taking up a quarter of the screen, but it's like not much you're getting out of that, especially with me just as a talking head. So I just usually put video out, but I just make it a slate. That's what it's much easier. And some of my peers do the same thing, and it works. Because like they said, sometimes it's not even mattering what you're watching because you're just listening in. They also said that YouTube is playing a larger role in podcast discovery. The Q2 podcast metrics of the survey showed recommendations from friends and family remains on top with 22% of listeners aged 18 and older saying that's where they most often find new shows. They're going to YouTube for podcasting. So you have to have your stuff up there, which is why it's important that all these different audio hosts, Red Circle, Spreaker, Podbean, and all the others, they're all offering options to post to YouTube and share it there, which makes total sense. Soto says that, quote, I know video podcasting isn't for everyone, but before you put the idea to bed early, consider the idea that you would be giving your show a chance on visual first platforms that people are using for content other than podcasting. It's an opportunity. It's a form of discovery. And I'm going back to my original point. When streaming wasn't conducive because the quality wasn't that good, because you would have constant buffering of the stream, it was really much by the mid-2010s, especially with a smartphone, with the iPhone kicking in and really the advent of 3G and 4G. Once we got to that point, streaming became much easier, and being able to stream through Wi-Fi on your service and having DSL speeds that can go up to, 50 megabytes per second or higher made things much easier to be able to stream at home or stream on the road. And so now you can easily do that. I mean, I've done it many times where I go out driving around or listening. I'll listen to YouTube or I'll listen to Spotify or whatever to listen to podcasts. And I can do quite a bit of YouTube content where it's just content creators. Because sure, they're doing video content, but what they're giving me is good audio content. So yeah, just set it and forget it. And people already have that kind of feeling when they want to watch TikTok or they're watching multiple streams of content. They'll have the TV on, they'll have something else. They can go and, cast it to their Roku or their Google or whatever they want, or their smart TV. Gabriel Soto's right. It's just what happened was that at one point, much like he was thinking that all these other major corporate media types would have dissuaded or been discouraged from using video in podcasting. And I would have been in that same boat. I would have said the same thing 10 years ago. But now the streaming is so good, and people have gotten so accustomed on discovering content on YouTube. Yes, do the audio, do the video. And even if you don't do video, just put your content up there with a slate. At the least do that. Like for me, I get a good audience on there that watches my content. Like I'm not pulling in great numbers right now, but I just think it's another revenue stream if I can build the audience. And I hope people will decide if they're listening to this on YouTube, please like, share, and subscribe. Hit the button so you never miss an episode of any of my content. I push out 4 times a week. I do this for all of you. So he's not wrong. Now things have happened because, honestly, people are willing to engage. They just feel it's normal to watch people in front of a microphone and watch them just there as a talking head without anything else really going on. It's really interesting. The podcast industry is facing a return to more normalized media consumption habits. And Edison's Infinite Dial report earlier this year, there was a 3-point dip in the number of people who said they didn't listen to a podcast on a monthly basis. But now, podcast listening is done mostly at home, and Americans are now spending less time there. In their weekly survey, Edison's Podcast Metrics said that of 8,000 weekly podcast listeners, they say that during the second quarter, they listen to podcasts mainly at home. 60% of them at home, 19% in the car, 9% at work. And when it comes to the cars, Soto then makes a point with podcasting being a home thing. Its growth was always going to stall just like Netflix, but he thinks that you could put more focus on podcasters and improve their reach in the car, where AM/FM radio still dominates. And Edison data shows 10% of time spent to spoken word audio currently happens in the car, which is less than half of the 23% of at-home speakers' spoken word audio listening. And then he also said that podcasters using social sites like TikTok could open up the medium to new listeners and help return the monthly listening numbers to growth mode. And that the use of TikTok among those age 12 and older has more than doubled in recent years. So also he says that the podcast industry should do more to reach out to blacks, Hispanics, and women with content they want to hear, seeing the opportunity to bring those listeners on board and providing resistance to another downturn in podcast listening. See, I don't know what to say about that. I think there are plenty of programs out there with a wide representation and a load of diversity. What needs to happen is just you need to be able to find those shows to be much more discoverable. So he thinks the industry should do that, but he's talking about the corporates. More representation, more social equity, more diversity in your content. I get that part. But there's more than enough grassroots programming out there to satisfy the audience. Another interesting note they had, Generation Alpha, which is before Gen Z, those born after 2010. So we're talking about preteens and younger, children. They're getting new listeners on that because they also said about half of the weekly podcast listeners have kids, and 3 in 10 told Edison that their kids age 12 and younger have already listened to a podcast. For the most part, a lot of podcasts don't really put out explicit content. This program, I don't put out explicit content. The wrestling show, I might drop an F-bomb or that here and there. The Depraved and Debaucherous show, it's just an adult show, so I would call it explicit. And that's what I do with those shows. But all that's fascinating to me right there. Podcasting is making its run. Now, let's talk more about what's going on here in the story they talked about where YouTube is now the most used podcasting platform. And by the way, they have also set up their own page dedicated to podcasts and for you to go ahead and discover and be recommended new podcasts based on your habits. Twitter, we'll talk about in a moment, has also done something where they're going to set up their own section for podcasting, taking basically what Facebook was trying to do until they dropped off altogether from the podcast run. So The Verge reports how YouTube is now the most used podcasting platform. And that was according to a survey of 3,000 U.S. podcast listeners 13 and older for the Podcast 360 report. 78% said they used the free version of the streamer to consume a podcast. That puts it ahead of Spotify and Apple Podcasts. They also talk about how the rise of video podcasts. Although listening is still the dominant way people consume podcasts, 83% of respondents say they listen to shows, 59% they watch podcasts. Again, another 60% in this survey as well. And 42% say they do both. Spotify and Apple both support video podcasts, but YouTube is still the default for video. And I also mentioned that podcast users largely want money for nothing and chicks for free. Nearly 2/3 said the price of subscription was an important factor in choosing a podcast platform. 56% said that ease of use mattered, and Spotify and Apple are also free and easy to use, but YouTube functions like a Google search. And consumers already use it for other things, so why not podcasts? And like we said, YouTube has launched their official podcast page. So you got that going for you. It debuted in late July. It's at youtube.com/podcast or the Explore page in app or browser on YouTube on the app. And they feature trending shows and channels that already have millions of subscribers. And they do not exhibit a ton of curation. NPR announced on Tuesday they're partnering with YouTube to bring more than 20 of their shows to the streamer. Hit shows like NPR Politics, Up First, and Throughline are now available on the platform. They've already had their Tiny Desk concerts up on the platform for a while. Usher's recent performance got more than 10 million views. And by the way, Meghan Markle now, the Duchess of Sussex, now has her own podcast called Archetypes. An interview show that attempts to deconstruct the labels that try to hold women back. Yeah, I'm going to subscribe to that right now. Pass. I'm sorry. She's still Rachel Zane from Suits to me. I'm not going to change much of that at all. I have not been able to get past where this is all changed here. Let's break into the landing page that YouTube has created here. Ars Technica went a little more into detail, and it's highlighting popular podcast episodes and playlists. Now, Google's already had their own podcasting product on Google Podcast, slowly growing out of the search division, and now is a more viable service around 2020. YouTube is still their strongest. Google's strongest media brand, so the move to the YouTube podcast makes a ton of sense. And with that, YouTube has the leverage, the advantage on all the other competitors. Spotify, Amazon, and Apple have spent millions of dollars on podcast-related technology and exclusively deals, and YouTube is trying to keep pace. They've also recently created the executive role of podcast lead with a mandate to, quote, manage a large volume of existing podcasts and relationships across the YouTube platform. And the company is also offering to cover startup costs for popular podcasts that want to make the jump to video. And there was a supposedly leaked YouTube presentation for podcast producers promising improvements for creators like support for RSS uploads, search and discovery enhancements for podcasts, more analytics, and audio-only ads, among other things. And in that same vein, since podcast movement is going on right now and podcasting is such a hot topic, Twitter's added podcasts to their live audio tab. Right now, it's only for iOS and Android users, English-speaking iOS and Android users. So now, Twitter will start recommending and streaming podcasts directly to users in their newly redesigned hub that groups live and recorded audio content by category. This integration signals Twitter's continued expansions into audio. The categories will include news, sports, and music. Each category will include live audio rooms, replays of recorded rooms, and popular podcast episodes for those categories, personalized based on the user's interest. And a Twitter spokesperson talked to Hollywood Reporter that the company is pulling from the existing RSS feeds and will tailor the recommendations based on the topics the user follows and the general interest tied to their accounts. And they can also submit thumbs up and thumbs down reactions to podcasts to further customize their recommendations. So Twitter, they say, according to Hollywood Reporter, is apparently trying to follow a Pandora-esque model for podcasts rather than trying to compete with Spotify or Apple. They're being told that, quote, we know that some discussions need more than 280 characters, and bringing people closer to the ideas, content, and creators they know and love is core to Twitter no matter where the conversations take place. I'm looking on my phone real quick. Have I got that added yet? I don't even know yet. Well, that was just a text message. So I don't know where it will be. Like, I know I still have the microphone section where I look at streaming via Clubhouse or their Twitter Spaces. At the moment, I don't have anything yet that shows me that part. Yeah, I guess if they've done anything with that yet, I have not seen it yet. So we'll figure that out soon enough. There's other radio content we're going to talk about in a minute, but I'll hold off on that because there's other things we should talk about. Let's talk TV and let's talk movies. Let's talk streaming right now on this portion of the Broadcasters Podcast. Streaming subscribers resist the idea of trading down from ad-free to ad-supported tiers despite the cost savings. That's from a story from Deadline this week. Or last week, actually. I just didn't get a chance to bring this up on the program. 1,000 entertainment fans were surveyed. Research from Fandom says a majority of paying customers plan to take a wait-and-see approach before trading down to a cheaper plan. So there are some people that are hesitant about removing the current subscription plan they have and taking one where they have to watch ads. And I can understand that part. If you try to watch Freeview, if you try to watch Peacock and you have the ad version part of the platform, or Hulu in the same vein, you can see it's kind of tough to really get yourself on that content. 57% surveyed, they said, quote, "I'm not interested in subscribing to any subscription services that have ads." 17% agreed with the fact that they said, "I am interested in paying less for an ad-supported tier if there's no free tier." 54% of respondents said they would only pay for ad-free streaming outlets. 8% went the other way and said they'd only get ad-supported ones. 38% would pick a mix of both. Very interesting on all that. So the streaming services are already going along with things now where, following the maneuver that HBO Max did, Netflix and Disney reversing their usual sequence, adding options with advertising after starting out with products lacking any commercials. Hulu and CBS All Access introduced ad-free versions after their ad-supported ones have been established. Disney will have an ad-back version coming up in December. Netflix will team up with Microsoft to develop the approach to advertising, and its new service will reach the market in 2023. So they're all going to have ad-supported models pretty soon, if not all of them. That's the plan, because everybody expects that to go along. That's the idea. Okay. So the movies are kind of slowing down right now. It's been tough to find movies to watch since the start of August, because there hasn't been much out there to watch. I'm trying to think of the last big movie that I went and saw in the theaters that was like a real big budget kind of deal. And at the moment, I can't think of the last one I saw. As I look into my Regal Crown Club account right now, and I look at what I've done, I have to look back and see what I did. Okay, Bullet Train would have been the last movie I went and saw that was pretty big. But in August so far, I watched Bullet Train and RPX. And then I watched an independent movie, Emily the Criminal, with Aubrey Plaza of Parks and Rec fame, in a really cool role. If you haven't had a chance to watch that movie, I would highly recommend it. But obviously, you probably will not catch it in the theater. You'll probably watch it on Netflix or some other place, streaming down the line, I'm pretty sure. But then this past weekend, I watched, in RPX, Dragon Ball Super Superhero. And I watched the subtitled version, which was fine with me. And another worldwide release for that film. And would you believe it? This thing made money. It pulled more money than the Idris Elba movie Beast this past weekend. Last weekend, it pulled $20 million. Number one in the box office. How about that? And if I look at the numbers right now, currently, Dragon Ball Super currently has made $51 million in the box office. Domestic, international, worldwide box office, $51 million, $25 million for domestic. That is wild. And this last weekend of the box office, it was released to 3,000 theaters. That's huge. That's a big, big deal. And it's amazing how people will go ahead and watch those movies. They were really into it. They wanted to see it. But right now, I can't say that for the rest of these other movies. Beast, only pulling $27 million so far. Worldwide, $14 million so far domestic, and that's it. They're struggling. But right now, if I go to the theaters, there's a couple of summer movies that are left up, but there's not much going on right now. I mean, there's a couple of movies that are coming out that might be interesting. Breaking with John Boyega, The Invitation with Natalie Emanuel from Game of Thrones, which I would consider watch, but it's more horror than thriller, so it's not for me. Can't watch scary movies. I really can't. And it's very different than what I was watching when it came to Elvis or Thor or Top Gun. Even Lightyear, I would put in that category of the big blockbuster movies that we had, or Doctor Strange from earlier in the summer. Like, we don't have much else to work off of. That's it. And when you look at the schedule right now, I mean, there's movies coming up, but there's not much. Not much to really work off of. So Breaking's wide release, but I have to go look for it. I have to go down the book if I'm going to go watch it. The Invitation of 3,000 Years of Longing is out this weekend. Next weekend, I'll probably go see Honk for Jesus Save Your Soul. That's what it looks like I'm going to go watch. That looks interesting. Sterling K. Brown, and Regina Hall in that one. Then there's Barbarian and Medieval on September 9th. Clerks 3, September 13th. Silent Twins and the Woman King, September 16th. Don't Worry, Darling, September 23rd. Bros on September 30th. And Smile on September 30th. There's not much going on. Like really big money blockbuster, like bona fide hits. The next 2 months are going to be tough, and that's why the movie theaters are kind of struggling right now. Where AMC is trying to go and do, what is it? They're doing a kind of a stock split for themselves. The ape stocks we're hearing about now. Regal, there's a contemplation of Chapter 11 bankruptcy by their parent company Cineworld. All that's going on. We'll see what that's all going to be about. There's a lot to be said on all that right there. All right, I want to take another story or two before we wrap things up. A couple stories in radio that are very important that I want to make sure to point out to all of my radio brethren out there, who I feel for you, and the plight you go through, and the morale you have to take where the business is being run and the people that are running it at the very highest levels are just, they're just incompetent in some cases. I'm sorry. FCC is proposing a 13% hike in annual fees, and the draft order circulated among the 4 FCC commissioners has not only proposed this increase in price, but they've also not reallocated any of the full-time staffers as suggested by broadcasters to make the plan for equitable. So the new fiscal year starts October 1st. Commissioners are expected to make the changes to the proposed fee structure. Rather than a fundamental rethinking of how costs are divided among the industries, the revisions are more sought to be along the margins. So these stations would have to pay 13% more than they did a year ago. The biggest FM signals out there in the largest markets would have to pay an annual fee of $23,585. That's a big chunk of the budget for any station any year. The biggest AMs in the largest cities would be $18,885. That's a lot of money. A big chunk off the board right there. The National Association of Broadcasters has called this proposal unfair, unsustainable, and unlawful, and would require radio and TV stations to pay the costs associated with the Commission's implementation of the Broadband Data Act, focusing on collecting information used to create maps showing where high-speed internet reaches. The plans for broadcasters have not gone unnoticed on Capitol Hill. 92 members of Congress have sent a letter to the FCC expressing concerns with the plan, and as a bipartisan group of lawmakers urging the agency to adjust the fee structure, taking into account factors that are reasonably related to the benefits provided to those required to pay the fees. 13%. So one company, the Cromwell Group, and their president, Bud Walters, says he finds it hard to believe the FCC can justify the increase. His company paid $65,000 last year in fees, and then it would go up to $75,000 this year if the new increase goes into place. And Walter says it comes across as a new tax. It will be harder in smaller markets that are vulnerable to a potential economic slowdown. That's a big thing right there. 13%. That's a lot of money with these stations being put on. And you already know that the music licensing firms out there, the BMIs and ASCAP, are trying to get radio royalties. So radio continues to get hit from all these different directions. And these corporate entities they don't have an answer for all this. They're not finding the ways to make the money. And it's not going to matter to the federal government or to the music industry, of whom you have to rely on their services to allow yourself to be on the air, number one, as an FCC regulated station, or being a music station playing the music of all these artists, new and old. It's all that you have to consider. Next thing we got to talk about is iHeartMedia. They decided to move into the metaverse. They now have iHeartLand in the world of Fortnite. It's a big move for them. So inside the Epic video game Fortnite, the virtual space described by iHeart is a state-of-the-art, always-on entertainment space where music and gaming collide. The iHeartLand was developed by Atlas Creative, a game developer specializing in Fortnite Island development. And that this is an independently created experience in Fortnite and not sponsored, endorsed, or administered by Epic Games. Now, we already know that iHeartMedia was trying to expand to the metaverse with iHeart events and experiences on kids' gaming platform Roblox. And the iHeartLand launch is going to be kicked off with a special 2-part performance by Grammy-nominated singer, songwriter, and producer Charlie Puth. This virtual gig will be the first concert in the metaverse. Takes place on September 9th at 7 p.m. inside Fortnite at iHeartLand's so-called State Farm Park. And there will be 20 other major events across the music and podcasting space, including unique artist fan experiences that can be unlocked through gameplay. Plus, Charlie Puth will have an album release party with new music to be performed by the artist ahead of his upcoming album, Charlie, being released on October the 7th. Plus, Puth will host an interactive game designed to test fan knowledge leading up to his big shows inside iHeartLand. I don't know if this is going to do any good. I really don't know anybody that really is that engaged or involved in the metaverse. I don't know. This is a big corporate radio company trying to stay relevant in the space and trying to go after the younger audience, which they're not going to use their own terrestrial outlets to do so. They're just going to invest in the metaverse, which is not a big spend for them if they're going to do that in the first place. So I don't know what to really think of what is being done with iHeartRadio on this whole idea, thinking that they're going to make something big out of being in the metaverse. But and I'm going to point this out to Conal Byrne, the CEO of the digital audio group for iHeartMedia. Conal, I'm going to just say this. I appreciate you doing what you got to do to try to make things work out within the content that you have, okay? I appreciate what you're trying to do with the digital products and what you're trying to do there. But there's something to be said about how iHeartMedia just doesn't get the right idea. Why they're not doing more to invest back into resources and the content needed and being more forward thinking and more enterprising of the content they make for what they're doing on their terrestrial networks, on their AM and FM stations. Why does it iHeartMedia would just go and let those properties just go by the wayside and go on a continued staggering decline and then just decide to go ahead and expand to other areas for income when you need to go ahead and get your bread and butter shored up? Because, I mean, it's fine to go ahead and, take a little bit of money that you have to put in the metaverse. It's not like you have to put that much money into it. And whatever kind of deal you did with Epic Games to get a game developer to put your iHeartland available. But that's an investment that's not going to play out and be profitable, not for a while. So why focus on that? And really, you're doing something where you're going to have Charlie Puth have his album party. You're going to do the whole promotion for him. See how that works out for October 7th to see the metaverse launch of his music will really make a difference. And then you'll see what else you do with the other performances you plan to put out there. I don't know. But this is where you're supposed to diversify all of your resources, all your media resources to create and market and promote where Charlie Puth is being promoted across the radio. But then other artists should get to have that same thing, but they're not. Of course, it's go after an established artist. It's already been out there. They're not going to work with anybody new. They can't. When I looked at the latest media base look, I mean, you're very lucky if you find any artists that all of a sudden their songs are up on their charts and they're being played regularly in radio. Right now, Nicky Your Sunroof is a viral favorite that's been out there, but it's been out there for a long time. And that song right now is number one in radio. Kate Bush, Running Up That Hill, is still currently up very high at number 5. But Stranger Things and the whole phenomenon was a month and a half ago. Hell, I'm not even getting the influx of Kate Bush fans out there, downloading the episode like I was back in July. It's a little bit late to the party, folks. Otherwise, you're just seeing all these majorly important artists like Steve Lacy. He's one that's starting to get noticed right here. Joji Glimpse of Us also getting a chance to get noticed now, but his song's been out for a while. And then when I look at Young Gravy, Betty, that's gotten now an 18% jump because it's an artist through Republic Records. So, it might be viral, but people already know, when you look at where that artist is coming from, that's another story. Jax Victoria's Secret is an Atlantic artist, by the way. So there's some of these viral artists that are basically plants because they're by big labels, and it's something goes on with a particular artist that we've never heard of before, unknown, get signed to a big label. They'll see if they can use the radio route to get themselves up somewhere. That's what they're going to try to do. All right, that's all I got for the show tonight. Thank you for catching the Broadcasters Podcast as you always do. Downloading it, subscribing, liking, sharing if you're watching it on YouTube. Let's come back here again 7 days from now and do another Broadcasters Podcast. And until then, remember that content is king and the control of your content is in your hands.
Thank you for listening to the Broadcasters Podcast. Find all the links to subscribe to the show by going to broadcasterspodcast.com. And don't forget to check out the King of Podcasts wrestling program, the Wrestling is Real podcast, exclusively at wrestlingisreal.com.